Okay, thank you guys so much for joining me today. Today we're going to be doing kind of a generally broad overview of the buying process. I've tried to have this include all the different types of properties that we're selling here in New York, but it's going to kind of specifically really focus on condos and co-ops because I'm going to talk about the board process as well. And again, if there's anything that comes up during this, feel free to ask me. This is meant to kind of be a general overview to give me, to give you a sense of how the process works and what the main steps and stages are. Who's in control of those steps and stages, and what kinds of documentation that you're going to need along the way. So, the first step in this whole thing is to kind of review with your potential buyer what they're looking for and what they're really prioritizing in their home search. And the best way to do that is by doing the buyer consultation with them. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but Weichert's buyer consultation, I think, is one of the most amazing tools that we have in order to really explain to someone the process of going through from meeting with you and talking about what they're looking for to getting them into their home and getting keys and things like that. And so, you being able to explain this process that we're going to talk about today is so vitally important when you're working with buyers, because a lot of the time we're working with first-time home buyers, people who might have bought in other states but not in New York City, and the process is a little bit different here. So during the buyer consultation, and again, we'll talk about that in a second, and there are seminars which we've done before and workshops that are just on the buyer consultation. So we're not going to go too in depth into that, but we will talk about it a little bit. What you really want to get is what they're looking for, right? What they're looking for in terms of a location, price, size, amenities, really get a sense and bond with them over, their home process and how you can help take them through the steps of it. During that buyer consultation, and again, these days, a lot of times it's done over Zoom or online, you also want to get the agency disclosure form and the fair housing disclosure form signed, right? And those two forms are important forms. Again, we need them for every rental and every sale that we are a part of. What it does is it explains to the potential buyer what your role and what Weichert's role is in that process, right? And so when you're working with the buyer, you're going to fill out the agency disclosure form to say that you're working as with the buyer as buyer's agent, right? You are representing them. And the best thing about this and the way to explain it is that they don't pay you anything, right? You are paid by the seller at closing. The fair housing form, again, is required before you take someone out. So again, you're going to get it done at the buyer consultation. And all it says is that you could inadvertently violate their fair housing rights. And these are the ways that it could happen. And again, you give them a copy of it. It's good for every single property that you show. During the buyer consultation, you also want to confirm that they're pre-approved, right? And talking about finances can be something that gets a little bit touchy, right? There are some brokers who say, I want to do this on the first phone call I have. There are others that wait to meet in person. Again, it's a very touchy subject, but I always tell people, really make sure that by the time you go out with them for the first time, you have a sense of how they're affording to buy this home, right? And again, a pre-approval verification is just ask them, hey, could I have a copy of your pre-approval letter? What I like to do is always, if they're using their own banker or their own broker, reach out to them, right? Because they're going to be a team member in your journey to get them to the closing table. And so you want to be in a great relationship with them. The pre-approval letter should have a price, a down payment, terms on it and things like that. You also want to make sure it has the property type. And oftentimes when we're working with buyers who might be coming from out of state, they might have spoken with a local mortgage advisor, and their pre-approval might be for a single family home, whereas here in New York, they're looking at condos and co-ops, right? And those numbers work out differently for the bank. So you want to make sure it's for the property type that they're thinking of looking at. And if they don't have a pre-approval, you say, not a problem at all. Let me introduce you to our amazing Weichert financial rep. Let me introduce you to Doug. And the way that I like to do it is either sending an email connecting the two, or telling them, hey, I'm going to have Doug give you a call. Here's his phone number so you can put it in your cell phone. He can help you through the whole process. And again, it makes it easier if you put the onus on Doug to call them versus them to call Doug, right? People, you get phone numbers all the time from people. I'm going to call you back. I'm going to call you back. They don't. It's much easier, and we have a better success rate when you say, I'm going to have Doug call you. So again, after you've gone through this kind of pre-process, what you want to do is start looking at apartments and going to see places and whatnot. The biggest thing about this is that you always want to make sure that you're getting feedback after showings, right? Sometimes maybe you'll be taking them out on a weekend, you'll see 3 or 4 properties. What I like to do is I always have a Google sheet going with properties that we've seen, what the price is. There's a little room they can put in comments. I share this sheet with them. That way they can keep notes. If they ever forget about something, they can go back and look at the things you've seen. And again, if there's someone who's taking some bit of a time, what you can do is keep track of what's sold and what it's sold for once it closes to help show them what's happening with the market, right? Maybe they saw something that's looking like a certain price point, and what it does is it allows them to keep track of what things have gone for and whatnot. So I think that's really an important thing to do. So the other thing is, and again, I'm putting this in here, this often happens with homes, single family homes, multifamily homes. Someone is going to ask to have an inspection done, right? I'm putting it in this review and search process because you always want to have an inspection done before you put in an offer. The reason for that is that most properties in New York State are sold in as is condition or as is working order. It sounds like big things, but what does that mean, right? That means is what you see is what you get. The owner is selling it in the condition that it's in when you see it. So if someone wants to do an inspection, usually they want to do that before you put in an offer because, again, I think some of you like Julie can talk about this, in New Jersey, if you put in an offer, if it is accepted, right, that you basically, when you put in an offer, it's a contract, and that doesn't happen in New York City. And so the inspection happens, and then you kind of like renegotiate the price afterwards. That does not happen in New York, right? So when you get to an accepted terms and offers, that is the price, right? Things might come up along the line that change it a little bit, but we don't do the same back and forth as you might do in other states. And so, the important thing is before you put in an offer, the inspection should be done. And again, that's kind of my best practice. So again, this is the buyer consultation. These are the first and second pages of it. It's a great tool to help you have these conversations with prospective home buyers and really make sure they understand the whole process, what it's like to work with you, and what it's like from start to finish. This map on the left here, we call it the Candyland map. And again, I will send out after this, I'm going to send it to everyone, the updated buyer consultation for New York City, so you have it as a PDF. Again, it goes through, and we call this the Candyland maps. It's these little squares and stuff like that, from the buyer consultation through closing, right? And so again, it's a cheat sheet that you have to go over with these people during this consultation, and we're kind of reviewing what this sort of looks like here and now. So again, you've taken your clients out, right? They're liking properties, they're liking working with you, they're loving you, you're doing a great job. Then you find a place and they're going to say, wow, I want to put in an offer on this place, right? You say, great. The offers should always be in writing, right? And that's two ways. When your client tells you to put in an offer, they should be sending you a quick email saying, hey, Anthony, I want to put in an offer of, $500,000 on this listing, and I want to close tomorrow, right? They need to send it to you so then you can put it together and send it to the other broker, right? So what constitutes an offer? And again, the next page, I'm going to show you a sample offer that I put in. It basically has the price, so what they're offering. And something to remember is that we are never to tell someone what price to offer, right? We're there for guidance. We're there to help them come up with an idea on their own. And we do that in a number of different ways, right? We can show them what recently sold places went for in the building, in the neighborhood. We can kind of give them a sense of market trends using urban digs and things like that. And they can say, they can say many things to try to get you to give them a number, but we are not supposed to give them a number, right? That is not our duty. Our duty is to help them come to terms with a number. And so the way that we do that is, again, we give them information, we try to coach them. I usually tell people that an offer within 10% or so of the asking price is usually an offer that will get a counter, right? That's not to say people won't put in offers lower than that, right? We just had an offer accepted that was 20% less than the asking price for a unit that had a lot of issues. But it's not for us to discourage them, right? We're here to help and support them and to help get them the best price possible. but we can kind of help guide them in terms of reasonable numbers and things like that, and giving ranges, or, say, what do you think it's worth? And that's a good way to get them to a number. And if they say, hey, I think it's worth 500,000, well, then maybe we go in a little bit less than that for our first offer, because there's often a back and forth. On the offer, you're going to have their name, their information, where they live, a short bio on them. And in addition to the offer itself, and again, the offer is basically just a letter. It's not a signed document or anything like that, though it could be, and some people do want one. We're also going to send in support documentation, right? And an offer is not complete unless it has a few different things, right? So the offer letter with the terms and things like that is number one. Number two is a pre-approval letter or proof of funds. And again, if someone's looking to buy something for $800,000 and they're showing a pre-approval letter for up to $700,000, to me, that's not a complete offer, right? We need to get an updated pre-approval letter for that purchase price. Again, if they're getting financing, you need a pre-approval. If they're paying cash, you'll need proof of funds. And what proof of funds are is it's basically a recent bank statement showing that they have enough to close on that property. In addition to that, we often need to include a revenue financial statement, right? And that's an asset liability statement. Again, I'll send you over an Excel version of this. All it does is it shows someone's financial picture. It's a snapshot in time of what their financial things look like. Anytime you're putting in an offer on a co-op, even if it's a cash offer, you should be including this revenue financial statement. And the reason for that is that, again, it's a two-step process, right? It's finding terms with the owner about a purchase price, and then it's getting through the board. And any good listing agent will want to make sure that they think that the person who's purchasing this will be able to get through the board before accepting an offer, right? Because so much time and effort goes into it. The other thing that I often include, and again, a lot of this is based on different things, but you can also include a letter from the purchaser to the seller, right? Especially if it's their primary residence, especially if there's some way they want to kind of connect with the seller, especially in a multiple offer situation. I like to include this. It really helps when there might be multiple offers in a similar price range to differentiate your person. I give the example, one of my clients put in a letter with an offer that we put in. There were multiple offers on it. She won basically, and again, they can't say this because there are many fair housing things that go into this, but it was later discovered that the seller was a teacher. She put in her letter she was a teacher. She won the bids, right? So it's just something that you can do to really help your case and to help your buyer really win, especially in a kind of competitive situation. So again, you put in the offer, you get a response from the listing agent, and maybe they say, well, we're not going to take that. We'll go back to you with this, right? And then there's this kind of back and forth negotiation. Remember, we never want to disclose what our clients and whoever we're representing, their top number, their bottom number, whatever it is. We're trying to get them the best deal. So it's really important to make sure that that you have that. So Julie asked about the revenue financial statement and how to get it. Again, Julie, there's a version of this in the Weichert Dropbox. I'm going to be sending you one very shortly. And again, for condos, you oftentimes don't need it. For co-ops, you usually do need it, but it's an asset liability statement, right? So one side of the page has, how much money they have in the bank, how much money they have in stocks and things like that. The other side has any liabilities they have, credit card debt, student loans, that kind of stuff. So again, I'll send you guys a copy of this. It is available in the Weichert Dropbox. You can Google revenue financial statement right now, and you'll find a bunch of versions of it. The one I'm going to send you, I think, is the easiest one to use, and it's an Excel file. So you can easily send it to clients. They can type into it, fill it out, send it back to you, and you're all good to go. Again, you negotiate to accepted terms, right? And that's getting through the second step of the thing, right? The first is finding the property. The second is putting in an offer, negotiating. And once you get to accepted terms, you're going to get to what we call, what we call the deal sheet and contract prep stage. But before that, I'm just going to show you an example of an offer, right? This is an almost exact offer. I changed some names and the addresses and things like that I submitted on behalf of one of my clients. So what I did was I typed an email, right? Hello, Kathy. I'm authorized on behalf of my clients, John Jacobs and Pietro Carlos, to offer $1.7 million for apartment 5 at 44 Sullivan Street. They will be putting down 20% and obtaining financing from Chase Bank for the remaining 80% of the purchase. They're able to close extremely quickly and have an attorney selected. Their pre-approval and revenue form is attached. So that's the main part, right? That is the offer. What did I put in there? I put the price. I put the buyers, and I put the terms, right? The terms are they're putting down 20%. They want to close quickly. Again, I like to always include, and again, this is really important to make sure that they have an attorney selected. That way you can put this in and it makes you seem more prepared, right? If you, and again, if you know the name of the attorney, you put, they're working with Randy Chang, or they're working with, Julie Wu as an attorney and stuff like that. This next part that I've highlighted, again, I just want to take a little aside. This is something that is specific to when you're selling in a new development, right? There are oftentimes additional costs incurred, and this is something that can be negotiated. So again, in this case, they asked the sponsor, the developer, to pay all sponsor building, New York State and New York City closing costs. So the transfer tax, the mansion tax, and stuff like that, right? That is a negotiable point. If you're talking about a resale, right? If an individual owner is selling a condo or co-op, these fees don't come up. So you don't have to worry as much about those things coming up. This is from a new development. So that's not often or not always included in a purchase offer letter. So again, John and Pietro are longtime New York residents and would make an amazing addition to the community at 44 Sullivan. Again, I gave a little bit about them, if they're neighbors, just a little bit, what they do, if it's a co-op, things like that. Thank you so much. And I look forward to putting this deal together. All the best, Jason, right? So I sent this. This was the body of an email. This was the body of the email. I sent this to the other broker along with their revenue financial statement because it was a co-op and their pre-approval letter from Chase Bank, right? That constitutes a full offer. I then called the listing agent to tell her that I put this in, and we had a little brief discussion, and then we started going back and forth, right? They countered, I think the asking price was 195. We put in 17. They countered at 18. We came back at 175. They came back at 18 and not paying anything, and we ended up getting it for 17, right? So there was a bit of a back and forth, and that can take some time, right? Usually when you're putting in an offer, you expect a response within about 24 hours. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but the other broker should really be getting back to any offer that you put in. Okay, so again, you come to terms, you have an accepted offer. What happens next, right? So the next thing that happens is a deal sheet is prepared and the attorneys get involved, right? A deal sheet has a bunch of different names. A deal sheet, a term sheet, an offer acceptance sheet, whatever you want to call it, right? There are tons and tons and tons of different versions of this, but all this is the information that goes into putting together the contract, right? The information on the acceptance and all parties to this transaction. So what happens is the buyer's broker will send over all of their information to the seller's broker. And I'm going to show you an example of this deal sheet in a second. Then the seller fills out all their information, and this sheet is then sent to the four main parties of the transaction, right? The two attorneys and the two real estate brokers. This sheet is used by the attorneys to negotiate the contract and to do the due diligence. So again, this is an example of an offer acceptance sheet, right? So if you see this, and again, this is one that I did before I changed the names of the buyers and stuff like that. On the left, it's going to have all the information on the sellers, on the right, on the buyers, and on the bottom about the transaction and things like that, right? So if you're working with a buyer, what you're going to provide is this kind of top portion here, right? So the buyer's name and address, their attorney and their attorney's contact information, and your information and Weichert's information, right? So we're going to provide all that information to them along with your license number and things like that. And you do that basically in the body of an email, right? So it'll be, here's my information for the deal sheet. It'll have the buyer's name and address, the attorneys, all their information, your information, and Weichert's information. And again, in this case, I was representing the seller. So again, the buyer and the buyer's broker sent me over this information. I completed this form, and then I sent it to the two attorneys. Just gonna go back 1 second. Oops. Okay. So the contract prep happens now, right? And this is when we're kind of here and from this stage to a little bit further down the road and during the entire transaction, right? Our job comes in two big chunks, and then we're during the whole process, we're kind of like the oil that keeps the machine going, right? We're here to help the other parties get everything done and stay on top of what's happening, right? We want to stay on top of the attorneys, to make sure that they're doing what they need to do and they have the information they need. We want to stay on top of our clients to make sure that they're happy, they understand what's going on and things like that. So what will happen is that the attorneys will review all pertinent information on the building and on the unit, right? And there are a few terms in here that might be new to you, but what happens is that a bunch of information is provided by the seller's broker or the seller's attorney or us to our buyer's attorney to make sure that they're doing all this information, right? So the first thing is a questionnaire, right? And a questionnaire is a list of questions. It's prepared by the attorney, right? We have nothing to do with the preparation of the questionnaire, but it's basically questions that this attorney is asking to the management company of the building about the building, right? They want to do their due diligence and make sure that, certain things aren't going on, right? There's no lawsuits. There might not be someone who owns like 80% of the building. You have all these different things. In order to get the questionnaire, there's a fee that's going to be paid by the buyer to the management company, right? And that is, again, coordinated by the attorney, but there is going to be some sort of fee paid. Usually it's between $200 and $500 for this questionnaire. It's a long set of paperwork and stuff like that. The offering plan is a documentation that is on the formation of the building, right? That's how the building came together and all of the underlying information on how that building came into existence, right? And so these happen in different ways. When you're building a co-op, it oftentimes was a rental building and they converted it. And so there's going to be an offering plan that has the information of how it converted, the share value of each unit, all this. Again, these are huge packets, like hundreds and hundreds of pages. In the case of, like, let's say a ground up building, it's, again, how they financed it, the laws that went into it, all this different stuff. So there are these huge packets. We don't have to read through them, right? All we have to do is make sure that offering plan gets to our attorney, right? And that should be provided by the seller or the seller's attorney. They're these huge packets. Most people throw them away at some point, lose them. They're like, I never need this again. Well, you do need it because you have to give it to the potential buyer of your property. So oftentimes the seller won't have it. They will have to pay the management to get a copy of it. It's sent over overnighted to the to the buyer's attorney. Building financials, right? The attorney is going to look at the building financials of the building and look at the budgets, the audited financials to see if there's any kind of things that are going on, to see if they owe a ton of money to someone, to see about the terms of the underlying mortgage on the building if it's a co-op. They're also going to see and ask, usually on the questionnaire, when the capital improvements were done, right? When was the roof last done? When were the elevators last done? Do they have to do the local law 11, the pointing of the building and things like that, right? So all these questions are going to be asked in the questionnaire. And because of that, right, because the attorney is really looking into the building and all these things, that's oftentimes why we don't have an inspection in New York City where we would in potentially other places, right? The mechanicals, the windows, all these things are usually provided for by the condo or co-op. So they're not things that your client needs to know, the exact state of repair on, right? That's not to say your client can't do an inspection. We have tons of inspectors we can recommend. They're welcome to do one. But again, most of the systems of the building, which are the things that an inspector really looks at, when you're buying a home, again, I purchased a home upstate New York. They looked at the roof, they looked at the boiler, they looked at these things, the septic system, which I had to replace, which is annoying, but all these big systems that are very costly, right? Those are usually provided for by the building. And so, yes, they might have to pay something for it down the road, but in the questionnaire, they're going to say, when was the boiler replaced? 10 years ago. Okay, it's got a 30-year life. You're not going to have to pay for that for a while. Things like that are going to be done. Okay, so Tom just asked, is the questionnaire fee on the closing docs or paid to the attorney up front? So it's going to be paid. It's usually paid by the purchaser up front, right? You pay for it when you receive it. So when you pay the management for it, or you pay your attorney to pay the management for it. You pay it kind of as you go. So it's not paid at closing; it's paid up front. A couple other things that they'll look at, they will look at the house rules, right? What the rules are for shareholders. Music can't be played after 11 p.m. There's a lot of things like that they'll look into. Again, make sure there's nothing crazy, right? let's say, your person has a dog and the attorney knows that, and the building says no dogs. Well, oh, we never changed the house rules. They're going to say, okay, change them so we can make sure this is all good. Sales packet, right? They're also going to get a copy of this. This is something that you'll also get a copy of. And this is what we call the board package, right? This is the compilation of data that needs to be completed to submit the application. And these packets look scary, right? When you see your first one, it's going to look very scary. They're going to ask for tons of documents. I remember the first board package that I had to do was for a co-op on 54th Street and 2nd Avenue. I spent like 2 all-nighters in the office here, tearing out my hair and putting it together, right? Because I didn't know how to do it. Well, the good thing is we've come up with an amazing system of how to do these packages. And we've cut down the time it takes. We've organized it, and we've got a great way to do this. Again, we have a session and a workshop on how to put together a board package. And as you go through it, it's a great thing that you learn. Again, it's your first one is challenging. Your second one gets easier. And at this point, I can do it in my sleep. So again, we try to help you guys with that knowledge. If you have a partner up, mentor, they're going to be helping you with your first couple board packages. And again, it's just a way that you can really get good at it. And they're never fun, but it's something that we have to do. And if we can make it easier for our clients, that's a great service that we have. They'll also review the sublease packet and the potential sublease rules. Again, especially in a condo, let's say you're working with an investor, they're going to make sure that they can rent it out, what the fees are for renting it out, and things like that. So again, so this is the deal sheet. So again, let's say the contracts are done, right? The attorneys are good. The buyer is going to sign the contract, right? And so the buyer is the first one to sign the contract. And when they sign, they're putting down the contract deposit. And usually that's a 10% deposit. It's not always a 10% deposit, right? Sometimes, especially if you're selling with different loans, maybe it's a couple $1,000s, maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 3%, who knows, right? The contract deposit is different than the down payment, right? And that's something to remember. It's very important, right? A contract deposit, like it says, is what someone is putting down when they sign the contract. A down payment is the total funds they're putting down towards the purchase price at closing, right? So in this case, if someone's putting down a 10% contract deposit and they're putting down 20% on a building, they're going to pay another 10% at closing. Again, maybe someone puts down 10% at contract signing and they're paying cash, so they're going to put down the other 90% at closing, right? And so that's just an important distinction to have in mind, right? A percentage is going to be put into escrow with the attorneys when the buyer signs, and it could be the same, but it's usually different than what's put down when they close. So once the buyer signs the contract and puts down the deposit, the seller will sign the contract, and at that point, the contract is what we would call fully executed, right? And it is only at that moment when the property is off the market, right? And so if you have a sale listing that you're working with, you continue to show until the contract is fully executed, right? And that is for your seller's protection. If you're working with a buyer, right, and you knew there were multiple offers, you want to make sure that everything runs quickly to get them into contract so that someone else doesn't swoop in and get it from them, get another offer and stuff like that, right? So it is until that point that the property is still on the market. The buyer can walk away, right? They can say, you know what, I don't want this anymore. The seller could get a higher offer and accept it. And your client might be really pissed off because they're like, oh my God, I've already spent money on the attorney. I've already done these other things. Well, that's why it's important that we're there and we're kind of, again, the oil in the machine to make sure things are going and I just almost said quickly. We don't want to say quickly, efficiently, right? We don't ever want to pressure someone into signing a contract. It's up to the attorney to make sure everything's good and to tell them to sign, right? We never say, if you don't sign, you're going to lose this, right? But we say, hey, there's a lot of interest on this property. We've got to move in a fairly expeditious manner. A lot of people ask, what is the timeline between an accepted offer and going into contract? In a standard market, let's say a pre-COVID market, that's usually 5 business days, right? So they get an accepted offer on a Monday, they've signed by that next Monday. In these days, the due diligence is taking longer. For the attorney to do their job is taking longer. Things are remote. Things need to get sent back and forth. I'd say it's taking on average 2 weeks, maybe a little bit longer. But again, it really just depends on your attorney, how they're working and things like that. Sorry, I need some water, excuse me. Okay, so you are now in contract. Congratulations. We're not quite there yet, right? And so the next stage is the mortgage and board approval stage, right? So as soon as you have that countersigned contract, you're going to send it over or tell the buyer to send it over to their mortgage officer, right? Their banker, their broker, whoever it is, because they need that fully executed contract to go through their next stages, right? They're going to order an appraisal, and again, usually that comes in about a week or so from them getting the contract, and they're going to evaluate the purchase price, right? The appraiser's job is to make sure that the bank is buying something that actually exists and that they're buying something that is worth what they're paying for it, right? Because again, the bank is putting up a large percentage, most of the time 80 to 90% of the purchase price. So they want to make sure it's worth what the contract price is. Again, our job in that is to help coordinate with the seller's agent to make sure that they're meeting the appraiser. Again, if it's an iffy situation where nothing's sold in a while, sometimes we'll help by putting together comps for that appraiser, right? We don't necessarily have to go. We can go if we want to, if they ask us to go, just to be there with them and help out with the process. But generally, they come in, they say, okay, there's a bathroom here, there's a bathroom here. It's X square feet. That's what we thought. This is fine. A few days later, you'll get an appraisal report. Again, these days, because things are so crazy with refinances and appraisals can take a little bit longer. Usually it's within 2 weeks. And again, that is needed for the bank to then keep doing their job, right? And after the appraisal, the bank will basically do their underwriting, get a bunch of other stuff, and they'll eventually give it a commitment letter, right? And once you have that commitment, that's when you can submit the full board package. So while the appraisal is working and while these other things are happening, you're going to be working on the board package preparation and submission, right? So the packet is prepared by the buyer's broker in coordination with the seller's broker, right? We have a whole workshop on how to do a board package about dividers and all this stuff, so don't worry about exactly what it looks like. But again, what usually happens if I'm working with the buyer, I'm putting this package together with my buyer. I'm reviewing it with the seller to make sure they're happy with it. Once they're happy, we submit it to the management company with a bunch of fees, right? There's different fees for different buildings. So once it's submitted to the management company will usually do credit and background checks on the applicants, and then they will send the package on to the board. The board then reviews the package. And again, one of the big questions is, well, how long does this take, right? In a standard environment, you submit the package, usually within 2 to 3 weeks, it will be forwarded onto the board. The board then usually takes a week or two to review it, and then they'll ask for an interview. The board interview is going to be scheduled by the management company. And again, they usually have a standing date and stuff like that. It's often virtual these days. Again, I've had 2 Zoom interviews. They've gotten approved and things like that. And then usually you have to wait a few days, but then you get board approval. And again, you'll get an email from the managing agent saying so-and-so is approved for the sale. Julie asked the question, does board need to approve cash buyers for condos? They do if it's not a sponsor sale, right? So again, every building in New York City that is a building that you can buy in, that you can buy a unit in, let's say, has a board, right? So a condo has a condo board, a co-op has a co-op board, a condup has a condup board, and they have the right to approve every single sale that happens. They have different rights though, right? A condo board has the right to execute their right of first refusal, right? So a condo board, as long as they've gotten all the application material, they can't say this person can't buy in this building. What they can say is, we want to buy, as the board, we want to buy the unit for that price, and they can buy it. And usually that only happens, and I've only heard of it happening once and maybe a second time coming up, is if the purchase price is too low, right? So let's say 1 bedrooms in a building go for $1 million. Someone is trying to sell their unit for $500,000. The board can say, you know what, we're going to buy it for $500,000. That's a great value, and then go and resell it. In a co-op, they can reject someone for any reason. They don't give a reason, and it doesn't mean they have to buy it. It just means they're rejecting the sale, and they have to bring up another buyer and stuff like that. Again, there are certain instances, and these are when there are things called sponsor sales. And again, this is a little bit more technical, but we can talk about this very quickly. When there's a sponsor sale, right? When you're buying from a developer or the person who has the rights of the developer in a condo or co-op, those don't often need board approval. Even if you're getting a mortgage, you don't need board approval. If you're paying cash, you don't need a board approval. And again, you'll see in the listings, they're called sponsor unit, right? And so there are trade-offs to those units. We can get into that more. As an example, Michelle and Eunice have a couple buildings in Brooklyn, one at 25 Parade Place. They're selling sponsor units, so you can buy it with no board approval. They also have resales in the building where there is a board approval process. So it's just a different thing. So when you're buying from a sponsor, there is not board approval. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So the next stage is, right, you get board approval, all happy, go lucky and stuff like that. The next thing is the closing stage. And again, just as an aside, if you are selling a single family home, a multifamily home, you basically jump this board process part, but every other stage is probably pretty much exactly the same. So again, now you get to the closing stage, right? So the closing is scheduled by the two attorneys. Again, you get that letter from the management company to say so-and-so is approved, great. You send it to the attorneys schedule the closing date, right? You kind of, again, you're there to help make sure everything's going forward. Sometimes there are delays. Management doesn't get to someone, right? So sometimes we step in. Again, we're just kind of the oil in the machine to help out the parties because, attorneys get overwhelmed, management companies are overwhelmed, but we might have a little more time. We're going to schedule the final walkthrough of the apartment by us as the buyer's broker and with the buyer, with the listing agent, right? Usually it's the morning before, the evening before the morning of the closing. And what that walkthrough is to make sure all of the stuff that's out of there is out of there, to make sure the appliances are in working order. Again, sometimes there'll be very small things that come up and you're like, it's a nightmare. I had a closing that was delayed for a little bit because of a broken wine fridge from 1980, even though we were in 2015. It was crazy, but we worked it out. And then you have the closing, right? And again, most of the time, closings are done virtually these days, or we're not really invited to the closing. What you want to do is coordinate with the other agents or with the attorneys to figure out how we're picking up our check, right? Sometimes we get to go at the end, we say, hi to our buyer, we get a check there. Sometimes they wire us the funds. Again, we'll go into this once you're in this process. We'll talk about how that really, really effectively works. But again, after the closing, it's really, really important to stay in touch. I always give a closing gift. Totally up to you. Personalize it, make it work for you and your brand and how that works. Again, I'm a huge wine fan. I usually give wine. Unless I know they don't drink, then I give them something else. Follow up with them. Hey, how was moving? Hey, how are these things going? Ask them for a review. Again, I always ask on Zillow. That links to the My Weichert system. And think about sending out some just sold marketing materials, right? Even though you represented the buyer, what you can do is you can send an email to people. You can send a postcard to people in the neighborhood saying, hey, I just brought a great buyer. If you're thinking about selling, great. Or if you're thinking about buying, great. My people got a great deal and stuff like that. Again, it's just a way that, every time you have a listing, you sell something, it's a great touch point to tell people, right? We have to market ourselves, and this is a great way to market. Oops, I think someone has a question. Okay. Tom is asking, are any new building developed as co-ops as opposed to condos? And how would sponsor units work there with board approval? Okay, great question, Tom. So most new buildings are developed as condos, number one. There are some that are developed as co-ops, and the reason for that is usually one of two things, right? Number one, in order to establish a condo, the land that the condo is built on has to be owned outright. So you cannot have a mortgage on the land that a condo is established on. Because a lot of people have mortgages on the land, again, let's say there's a rental building that they're thinking, hey, I want to convert this to a condo. But if they don't have enough, but they have a $5 million mortgage on the land that it's on, let's say it's a big rental building, and they can't pay it off and they don't want to get investors to pay it off, well, then they would have to turn into a co-op, right? Because they can't have a mortgage on that land. The other thing is that if the other situation where we get into is in buildings which are called land lease buildings, right? And so In a land lease building, the land that the building is on is not owned by the developer or by the corporation that's turning into one. So a good example is some of the buildings over at Hudson Square, right? So there's a building, 70 Charlton, I've sold in before. That is a land lease building, right? The land that building is built on is owned by Trinity Church, and they cannot ever sell it. So, so what's happening is that they turned into a co-op or a condop. I think they're calling it a co-op, but it functions like a condo, right? Unlimited subletting, you can do all these other things. How does sponsor units work with board approval there? It's a very similar thing, right? When you sell it, there's no board approval at all, right? So when the sponsor units sell it, there's no board approval at all. And then when you do a resale, there is board approval. So it's very similar to that. You know, again, the sponsor can sell condo units or co-op units without board approval the first go around. And that's it. So so that is kind of in a nutshell the buying process. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you guys so much. So you can ask me more questions. Thanks, guys.